The Dr. Terri Show is presented by Evexias Health Solutions. Evexias Health Solutions is an emerging leader in the integrative medicine on a mission to positively impact people's lives through the transformation of healthcare. Evexias educates and trains practitioners on the new, innovative, integrative therapies that support a preventative care model that drives vitality as you age. You can learn more about Evexias Health Solutions and many of the healthcare topics we discuss on the Dr. Terri Show at Evexias.com. That's Evexias.com, as well as find a provider near you. Now here's today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Terri Show. Today I have in the studio Katelyn McCormack. She's a registered nurse, mom of two, wife of the Dr. Matt McCormack, who you might have heard us talk before. He's a chiropractor. But it's a really great conversation about this terrible word called vaccines. But maybe it's not so terrible of a word, and maybe we just need to kind of reframe the conversation. Katelyn brings so much wealth of information to the conversation. She even uprooted her whole family from California to Texas to chase this concept of medical freedom. And medical freedom is something that I think we all need to become familiar with that term. So I hope you'll join us in this conversation. It's a very factual, non-emotional, lighthearted, but really amazing conversation about vaccines and vaccines in children specifically. So join us in the conversation today. Welcome, Katelyn. So I love that we're going to have this bold conversation. Vaccines is just it's almost a dirty word. And it's almost like a scarlet letter thing if you don't do it, and versus if you do it. And there's
Absolutely.
So many ways to have this conversation. I mean, but we're going to talk about vaccines in general in kids. I'd love to do another conversation, another show, because you're a nurse and there's a lot of, it's coming up on flu season, and
Yep.
Nurses are being forced to take flu vaccines, and are they helpful? I know they're not, because I've done the research, because I declined and when I was in a program, and I backed it up with great data
Yep.
that showed that in healthy adults, the flu vaccine doesn't make any difference. Where it might make a little bit of a difference is in immune compromised people, but then not always. So,
And it's year by year on that.
and
we
it's
don't know.
year by year, exactly. So, but I want to talk about vaccines in children because it's such a hot topic. More and more parents are deciding either not to vaccinate or to slow down the vaccination schedules. And then just, do our kids even need some of these vaccines? Like hepatitis B, what is the chances that a kid is going to need to be exposed, they're going to get exposed to that? But first, let's kind of start with what got you interested in this topic. I know you've written, it's a book, but it's really a primer, and what is the name of that?
Safe and effective, question mark.
Question mark, yeah. Safe and effective, question mark.
Why medical freedom's worth fighting for.
I love, that is one of my favorite terms right now is medical freedom, and it's a hot topic in our country right now, especially over the last 4 years. Obviously, that's a whole nother podcast that I would love to talk about with a whole panel. So what got you interested in writing that book in the first place? And then talk about why you moved from beautiful, sunny California to Texas.
Yeah, so it all ties in together. And as everyone knows, when you become pregnant, your world shifts dramatically.
Right.
So now my decisions were not just mine. They were my future children and child at that time. And so I started to ask questions, and you just enter the medical system. I was a nurse. I was in it. And you go to the doctor and they recommend all these things and you follow the schedule. And I started asking some questions and I wasn't getting great answers. And so I was interviewing pediatricians, and I'm like, what about this? What about that? And everyone was just kind of like, well, vaccines are safe and effective. I
So
just
it's kind of the canned response.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Safe and
What kind of
effective.
questions were you asking?
So do I need to do hepatitis B on day one? Like, what's the intention behind that?
Right.
And it was just like, well, that's what we do. Day
Right.
one, that's what the schedule says, and we want to stay with the schedule.
Are a lot of pediatricians not even asking the questions themselves? They're just
None.
doing it?
Correct.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting journey where I was pregnant and I was starting to look for a pediatrician, and I would ask questions, and I just got the same response over and over again. They're safe and effective. They're safe and effective. Well, my mind doesn't stop with that. So
Yeah.
it's how safe and how effective.
Yeah. And where's the studies that
Where-
show
yeah,
that
where
they're
are they?
beneficial, safe, effective, right?
So I have my baby, and day one, I declined the hepatitis B vaccine, and I am instantly a pariah in the hospital.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Scarlet letter.
I have this flag on me. I have more doctors checking on me. I have all these people asking
Making sure
me
your
questions.
mental health is okay.
Mhm. Like literally questioning my sanity. And I'm like, I'll talk about it with my pediatrician after this. Like, we're okay. So I go to my first pediatrician's appointment with my brand new baby, and I'm supposed to get our first round of vaccines, and I'm sitting there and I'm having a solid panic attack in the
Right.
room with the doctor and with the medical assistant. And I'm like, I don't think this is right. There was just something innately in my being that I really
Right.
didn't want to do it.
Your gut.
It was talking to me,
Yeah.
and I felt so pressured coming from just a standard medical model.
Right.
And so I did the first one, and I walked away from there. My husband had to go speak at an event, and I sat in the parking lot with my 1-month-old baby, and I cried and I drove in circles because I didn't want to leave my husband because I thought something bad was going to happen to my kid.
Right.
And so after that experience, it was just like, there is something innately in me that is saying I need to question this more.
Right.
And so the regret I have lived with was I didn't stand up for myself in this moment
Right.
when my body was intuitively telling me that I was doing something that just didn't align with my family, my morals, or my values.
Right.
So then I started to ask more questions, and I went to our pediatrician, and I was just going over the schedule with her, and I was like, hey, if I don't do the 5th Tdap vaccine, if I just stop at 4, like, is that okay with you? Because the 5th one, the adverse reaction rate goes up, and the actual benefit profile is really, really small. And she's like, no, you have to do the 5th. I was like, well, that doesn't make
But
sense.
why?
Yeah. And she said, you know what? I'm really sorry. We've had a lot of conversations, but I don't think you're the best patient for my practice.
Wow.
So we got fired that day.
Wow.
From the pediatrician.
Wow.
And it was just,
Because you were asking questions.
I was asking
And
questions.
that's a thing that I see. I work with a lot of clinicians, doctors, nurse practitioners, and confirmation bias is so powerful.
Yes.
And when you learn something one way, I really applaud the clinicians that do ask questions. I ask a lot of questions. I've asked why so much in my career. It's got me in a lot of trouble as well, which is what, pushed me down the nurse practitioner route to the doctoral route,
Yep.
so I could kind of be a little more in charge of some of the conversations and look for why and teach people why. So here you are with this baby and now no pediatrician.
no pediatrician.
Did we really need her in the first place? I don't know, but that's another conversation.
Another question.
We do need our pediatricians, but I wish more would become a little more
We do.
educated.
So I start looking, and I go on these directories, and there's no information on the internet about moms looking for alternative vaccine schedules. There is no information about pediatricians you can access. You call offices, they don't even entertain the idea.
Right.
They won't take you as a patient. So I finally go down this rabbit hole, and I find this one list online of vaccine-friendly doctors. And that was a term that was just new to me. So I'm
Right.
like, what does that mean? So I call physicians in my area, and I finally get through to this one provider, and I was like, hey, I want to pay to just sit down and have you answer my questions about vaccines. Like, I'm not even saying you'll be my pediatrician, but like, can I pay for your time? And she said, I need to interview you and your husband on the phone first before you can step foot in my office.
Wow.
I was like, this is jarring. How can I not...
Just ask questions.
No one
right.
will answer these questions. And I was in the medical industry, so it's not like I didn't know physicians,
Right.
but no one would answer them. So she got me on the phone, and she said, are you and your husband on the same page? And I said, we are, absolutely. And she said, okay, if something happens and your child is mandated to do something, will you do it, or would you leave the state? And I said, that's a really bold question. Like, I'm just inquiring. Like,
Right.
I'm not even saying you're going to be my pediatrician.
Right.
And she said, I need to protect myself and my license. And I am looking for a patient population that is committed to what aligns with my values. And so I just need to know where you're coming from in this. And I said, I'd leave the state. She said, okay, I need to call your husband, and I'm going to talk to him. So she hangs up with me, calls my husband, and was like, I'm a potential pediatrician your wife's interviewing. Asked the same question. He said, we'd leave the state without a doubt.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh. after we got through that gate, she let us in as a patient. She was the most fantastic pediatrician I have ever experienced in my life.
What was the gatekeeping, do you think?
People are reporting any provider that takes patients that do not follow the vaccine schedule verbatim. Wow. And so she was protecting her license because in California, everyone gets reported for every single thing.
Right.
And once you have a board complaint against you, then you're just always under this microscope. And she said, I need to protect myself.
Right.
And that was her gatekeeping.
Got it.
So when you see that as a nurse where providers
talk about medical freedom, even clinicians, and we experience this as clinicians, as you know, this is one of our big rants is, we are losing our freedoms more and more to assess our patients and make recommendations. If they don't fall in line with what is being mandated or et cetera, we saw this during COVID, obviously a lot, then we get reported to the board, right? And that's just so heart-wrenching.
Yeah. So that was our kind of story of finding a pediatrician. And then now I'm at the forefront of this movement. I have made alternative decisions with my nuclear family, myself, my husband, and my child. And now you have to start telling the people that you love that you're making a decision that isn't necessarily what they value or have even thought about. And so I told my best friend who was in my wedding at the time, and I was like, did you ever read the vaccine insert for the Tdap vaccine? And she's like, oh gosh, don't do that.
Don't educate yourself. Ignorance is bliss.
Okay. That was all right. And then I start to tell some of my family, and most of them received it super well. And a couple of them just looked at me like I grew a third head and that I lost every iota of intelligence that I had. It was, my parenting was in question. It was really, really, really heartbreaking, isolating. And I had no allies. It was a very lonely time. And so I started to guard myself for every interaction. And now I'm just in this defensive mode. And it really changed the first 6 months of being a mom because I was so weighed down with this decision of I've been ingrained and indoctrinated to follow this schedule that is safe and effective and saving lives and doing all these things. And my mind is starting to question this. And the people around me are not doing the research I'm doing. They're not spending the nights up learning what I'm learning, yet they get to threaten my parenting decisions. And it was something they were trying to take away from me that I just couldn't surrender.
Interesting.
And so it was just a really, really, really hard time.
And scary.
Yes. And there was I had to pay someone to ask questions to, which I'm happy to do for my children, but it's like she was even uncomfortable having the conversation. So why are we all so scared to talk about it? Which is why I'm just honored to be on this platform and others to be able to say, let's have a conversation. It's not pro-vax, anti-vax. It's not yours or this. There just might be alternative ideologies behind how we implement certain medical interventions, and we are all entitled to our own way to parent, navigate, and facilitate our healthcare decisions.
I mean, it's what our country was founded on was freedom and the ability to just ask questions and things like that for sure. I think back. I'm older than you, obviously by a lot, probably, but I just turned 57. So I just remember being a kid. I think we got 3 vaccines. MMR, diphtheria, and polio, 3. And then by the time I got the polio, it wasn't even the shot that left the scar. It was the oral by the time I got there. But how has that changed?
Great question. Drastically. So at that time, it was 3 vaccines typically on the schedule. By the mid-1980s, we're looking at about 7. Now, if you count doses on a conservative count, you are administering 54 doses to a kid by the time they're 18. About 33 of those happen by the time they're age 6.
Yeah, before school.
Correct, before you go school-age child. So the onslaught of what we're doing and the number of decisions parents have to make has just grown exponentially. If a mom decided not to vaccinate and you're missing 3, that's a lot different than if you're missing 30 doses of this. Of this. So, and if you have to play catch up because you did something and now your kid's going to go into school, then now they're compounding this and you have to get so many more doses at one time. So the interesting thing about vaccines is in nature, we encounter one disease at a time typically. You aren't exposed to measles, mumps, and rubella all at the same time. You acquire one disease at a time and the body is typically very good at handling that profile. When you compound these, and we do now MMR, so you get 3 and chicken pox, and maybe throw all the, like, the onslaught is just so heavy. So this burden is really, really great on these children, where it wasn't when we had a much softer vaccine schedule decades ago.
So what is the potential, what have you found just in your research, the potential negative consequences of this onslaught of all of these, this really is an onslaught to the immune system, really. And I know a lot of the answer, but I want you to answer it because this is your wheelhouse.
I mean, one of the big things that people don't really talk about are the autoimmune epidemic is out of control. And when we overstimulate the immune system, there's so many diseases at one time and try and have this huge response, we're triggering something that the body isn't innately meant to do. And now we have all of these autoimmune conditions that have come down the pipeline, and we wonder where they come from. But we're doing all this in addition to all the adjuvants in the vaccine. So we put aluminum in there, and we're opening the blood-brain barrier and doing all of these things. So it's not just that we've been exposed to 12 diseases at one time now. It's also we've put in these heavy metals and things that intentionally cross the blood-brain barrier, and we wonder what these downstream effects are. But nobody puts the correlation between this onslaught of the schedule and these immune system disorders that we're seeing.
So a couple of the question marks I've always had, you know, by the time my youngest got to the vaccine schedule, it was hepatitis A, hepatitis B, varicella, in addition to all those other ones. Now I'm sure there's more. And then, of course, fighting with the pediatricians. I have 4 daughters, and for my youngest 2, especially the last one, about the, you know, the HPV vaccine. Just, I just want to. Have you read the research on the HPV vaccine?
It's
Number
horrendous.
1, it hasn't slowed down or done anything to cervical cancer rates. It hasn't been proven. You know, there are so many strains of HPV. But what's not being talked about is all the negative consequences. There's a great book called The Vaccine Court. I know you know about it. That is really beneficial for parents to read, because I think one of the things, you know, vaccines, it shouldn't be a political conversation, but it kind of is, because one of the things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and we saw this with COVID vaccines, is a vaccine maker now by law is protected from any consequences of that vaccine. So I can make a vaccine that can kill people, which there are many that do and have, and don't have to, as a company, suffer any kind of retribution from that, because I'm protected because I'm calling it a vaccine. So to me, that's one thing that at a legislative level, if that right there stopped, I think we would have a lot less push for a lot of vaccines, because we would have to prove safety and efficacy and not just say it's safe and efficacious.
And what's really interesting with that, so that happened in 1986 because there were so many lawsuits coming out against vaccine manufacturers that they thought it was going to be a threat to the nation's health, because they would have to slow down production of vaccines to defend themselves in court. So the U.S. government took on that liability. So now everything goes into the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. This is just fascinating to me how this even came to be, and how we stand on this is okay. If I get injured or a child gets injured by a vaccine, you can't sue the manufacturer, you can't sue the doctor that administered it, even if they gave you the wrong vaccine, the wrong dose, anything like that. They are out of the picture. So you now bring it to the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and it goes into we call it vaccine court, but it's not really a court. And it has to fall under a guideline of something called the Table of Injuries. So you can only bring forth something they have already seen as detrimental from that vaccine. So say you pick one and your child has seizures and something happens. You can only get compensated for that vaccine issue if it's already on this pre-approved table that they already have. So if we introduce the HPV vaccine and all of these kids are having a different reaction that isn't listed on that table, you're not mandated to report it. It's only recommended that you report injuries that are not already on this table. And then when you go to this vaccine injury compensation program, and you do this, they don't get to look into all the previous cases that have been brought to this court. So if 500 kids have come with seizure disorders after a vaccine, you don't get to use the 499 before. You only get to bring your case that is looked at in a silo, and then that is awarded. So we've currently awarded just under $4 billion in this vaccine injury compensation program, and that is funded by 75 cents on every vaccine that is administered. 75 cents of that goes into this fund. So we know that we have a percentage of the population that's going to be vaccine injured. We prepay for it with the vaccines, and it's now been awarded just shy of $4 billion, and it's estimated that only 1% of vaccine injuries ever get reported.
100%. Yeah, and the thing that I keep thinking about with compensation, there is no compensation that can compensate for my kid that now has cerebral palsy.
Correct.
Or a chronic disorder like seizure disorder where they can't even get a driver's license. Like, how do you compensate for that?
Yeah.
So again, I'm all about root cause. How can we pull it back to the root cause and just create vaccines or a vaccine schedule that A, is it necessary, and B, has it been studied and proven to be safe and efficacious?
Right.
Let's talk about what's necessary. You and I talked about the podcast with Tucker and Casey and Callie Means, and they brought this up with hepatitis B, and it's so true. This is why I question hepatitis A and B. You know, hepatitis B is blood and body fluids. If the mother doesn't have it, what are the chances that a kid is going to get exposed to blood and body fluids that they need this vaccine?
Only through medical intervention.
Only through medical intervention, right. Yep. What hepatitis A, you know, this is foodborne, fecal oral, what, you know, oyster, raw oysters and, you know, foods like that, or contaminated foods. What is that exposure burden? You know, you think about that. I know when my kids were little and I was little, the way we inoculated ourselves against chickenpox was we went and played next door with the kid that had chickenpox.
Yes.
You know, or I'd send my kids over. Oh, yeah, your kid has chickenpox. Okay, I'm going to send my daughter over to play. You know, and now, you know, they don't get that luxury of that. So, you know, what if I'm a parent that, you know, I want to kind of spread this burden out? What is a good? How do I do that?
There are prescribed protocols. And so like Paul Thomas, the Vaccine Friendly Plan is a book that's out there. Dr. Bob Sears has a delayed modified. So there are schedules out there that you can do. And they kind of take out some of the legwork, take out a few of the unnecessary ones. The hard thing is depending on the state you live in, like compulsory vaccination is real. And at the time that I wrote my mini book, there were 5 states that required it, California being one of them when they passed SB 276 and SB 277, which it actually brings me to that point. So that pediatrician asked us, would we leave the state? And when my girls got a little bit older, I went to the Capitol and I fought some of this legislation that was coming through, and SB 276 was one of them. And why more clinicians were not more upset by this bill is beyond me, because it took the ability of the doctor to dictate the care of the child and put it solely in the hands of the state. So my pediatrician could no longer write medical exemptions. If I gave a dose of a vaccine and my child had an adverse reaction after that, if it wasn't death, that 100% obviously grants you not having another one, you oftentimes had to sign up for the second or third or fourth dose of that same vaccine. If you were able to get exempt from the one that you had an issue with, you still had to get all other ones, even if they shared an ingredient profile. So then I have my second child, and say my first child had a severe adverse reaction to chickenpox vaccine. I have to give it to my second child, and they are not allowed to enter school if they don't have the vaccines compliant. So family history was taken away. The medical provider could no longer write medical exemptions. They don't exist. They only came from the state officials who were not medical doctors and had never seen your child. So that was just a frightening overstep.
Full freedom gone. Done.
Entirely. So it was, once that bill passed, I came home, I cried to my mom at my kitchen table because she was watching my kids so I could go to Sacramento and go to the Capitol and do my part as a mom and a citizen. And I came home and I burst into tears and she said, everything's going to be okay. I said, it's not okay, Mom. And 6 weeks later, we moved to Texas. Like we just left.
So is Texas and some other states just more vaccine friendly, or, I talk about the different states that are?
Yeah. So you have personal belief exemptions. You have medical exemptions. And in most states, with the exception of the 5, California, Mississippi, New York, I'm blanking on the other 2, but you can have these personal belief or religious exemptions, and you can sign so that your child can attend public or private school and utilize one of these.
Yeah,
So
I've met people that moved from New York to Florida for this very reason. Right.
Exactly. So it's just, are you allowing the parents and their clinicians to make the medical decisions for that child?
Right.
So those are kind of the vaccine-friendly states. When you go back to what are my options as a parent, you have delayed schedules, you have delayed modified schedules, and then you have the choice to not vaccinate, and you have the choice to fully vaccinate. So, but all of those are a parent's choice.
Right.
So when I started this journey, it was just like, you vaccinate or you don't vaccinate, and
there's nothing in between.
There's nothing in between, and no one would talk in between. But now, as time has gone on, and I actually think that COVID has really opened a lot more people's eyes to what is happening in medicine and what rights are being taken away from me at this time.
And how blindly are we as clinicians just taking at face value what a drug company has put in front of us, right? And not asking questions. I teach when I'm teaching and training doctors all the time and dispelling myths about certain things. It's amazing. And you know, as clinicians, we're having to see a certain amount of patients to make enough money to pay the bills. And who has time to go learn different things and research and all that? It's kind of not an excuse to me, but you know, it's one of why I'm passionate about having this kind of conversation and putting that out there to our network, so people can start asking a little more questions. You know, but the fact that, you know, we're seeing more and more people having these conversations openly, and in group settings, and to see somebody with a voice like RFK and Casey and Callie Means and Tucker Carlson and all of these people. Of course, now, depending on your social media algorithms, you may not even ever be exposed to some of this conversation, which is another conversation. But at least some of these things are causing people to question, right? So, golly, there's so many different questions I have for you. So this is an argument. I'm going to argue on the side of pro follow the schedule.
Yeah.
I'm a California legislator.
Yep.
No, I'm not. That just made my heart beat faster. But in all seriousness, there is this argument, and you see it all the time, that, we're getting cases of mumps and measles again because all these parents that don't want to vaccinate their kids. How true is that?
There's a lot of arguments that can be made on all sides, and I think we need to be open to multiple perspectives.
That's great.
There's a lot of questions that we need to ask. One, first of all, are they wild strains or are they vaccine-acquired strains?
Right.
Because in the Disneyland outbreak of measles that prompted SB 277, that bill that came through, it was like 30 to 40% of the strains that were tested positive were vaccine acquired, means that it happened through viral shedding in some form or another, but it was not wild. That's
a great, I didn't know that. That's good.
It's really interesting. And now polio is the same way. We have more cases of vaccine acquired polio in the world than we do vaccine acquired polio, or than wild polio.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a good argument. So
that's one thing.
Yep. Know what you're reading. It's just like I tell clinicians all the time. Understand the details of the study that you're reading.
Pay attention to it. We always stand on this pillar of like herd immunity and all of this. So is it a failure to vaccinate or is it vaccine failure? So we look at these efficacy rates, and if we look at Tdap, because that's just a really common one we recommend for kids and adults.
Tetanus, diphtheria.
Acellular pertussis. Okay. So if we look at that, pertussis is what we're worried about.
Whooping
Tetanus
cough.
isn't even it's a non-communicable disease. So why we require that is baffling, because I can't give you tetanus.
Yep.
But if we look at that data.
It's the whole rusty nail thing.
Yeah. If we look at that data, for an adult, the Tdap vaccine at best is 70% effective. Within 4 years, the efficacy rate's down to about 30 to 40%. When we talk about herd immunity, they say we need 95% vaccine compliance to inoculate a herd to keep the weak safe. Our vaccines aren't efficacious enough to ever even
have herd immunity.
Require that. Yeah. Tdap for adults is recommended once every 10 years. And you're telling me at 3 or 4 years in after getting it, I'm only 30 to 40% effective. Like that doesn't make sense. So then we also enter or build the argument of, if I get vaccinated for a disease, is it stopping me from getting it and transmitting it? Or is it stopping me from having severe symptoms? And there's both sides of that happens. At some point it can stop you from having a disease, but oftentimes it just diminishes the symptomology that you're having, so you don't present as sick and you don't suffer the consequences. So then that begs the question,
that's a lot of risk just to not,
are we actually putting immunocompromised individuals or these weaker people in the herd that we're trying to protect at greater risk if you're not showing the symptoms? If you aren't showing coughs or things like that, or a fever, when you get sick and your daughter has a brand new baby and you go see this baby because you feel fine, are you actually putting her at greater risk because you do not show the symptoms of the disease profile?
Great point.
So it's really interesting that we stand so much on pregnancy with DTaP and Tdap for these kids, when it is, I'm dulling the symptoms and I'm probably putting a greater exposure risk to this baby than I was before.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's such a good point that I hadn't even thought of at all. So what, I just want to, we could go a lot of different ways, but I'm going to spend a few more minutes because I think this is important. We talk about healthy children. Obviously, that's what the vaccine conversation is all about.
Yep.
Whether you're for, whether you're against. And I loved your neutral stance and because I agree. I say this all the time. I don't know everything. So if I'm open to all sides of it, but I use my logical brain to kind of look at the data. And I think that's what you're saying is like there's arguments for both sides, but really go deeper into the argument, right?
Yes.
And just explore it a little bit more, and that's great.
And honor the person that's coming to you with information, because we don't do that. And if someone you love or you don't love is coming to you and wants to have a dialogue, they're not necessarily trying to change your mind. They're trying to feel understood.
Right.
So you don't have to change your whole platform because I do something different.
Right.
Just don't condemn me or my ways when you don't understand where I'm coming from.
And we saw that obviously so much with COVID, oh gosh, just so much shaming and, all of that. So just, I love that. Just honor the other person's where they're at.
Yeah.
And because that's all we're wanting is to be heard and be honored. That's so good. I wanted to ask you about, first of all, I want you to say one more time the title of your book and where can people get it, and what is the intention of the book?
So it's called Safe and Effective, Why Medical Freedom is Worth Fighting For. And it's a 1-hour read where I just outline the 12 key topics I feel like come into play with a vaccine conversation. Because when you open the door of that, I wanted somebody to have a resource that they can give a loved one and say, read this so we can meet on a level playing field and you can see that I am coming from these not out of fear, but I'm coming from these out of additional research and curiosity and just wondering if this is the best decision. So I found myself getting defensive, tongue-tied, or argumentative and wanting to throw out facts and figures when really it's an understanding conversation. So the intention was that you could give someone this 1-hour read so that they can understand your ideas and you can have a more civil conversation to express your curiosities or differences in how you want to navigate your healthcare journey. So it's not to try and change anybody's mind. It's a conversation starter so that you can get the Cliff Notes version of all the pieces that come into play in this really dynamic conversation.
That's great.
So it's available on Amazon. Like I said, it's a 1-hour read because there's tremendous literature out there. Dr. Suzanne Humphries, like all these physicians have written these really long manuals with so much research, and we need that. But the average person doesn't want to sit down and read 450 pages on one topic.
Like a lot of big words and concepts that are hard to understand. So to kind of wrap this up, the link to the book will be in the show notes. So I appreciate you spelling that out for us. But just to wrap this up and kind of just end on a little livelier note, and I don't know if it's lively. We've been having conversations throughout this podcast with different guests regarding the importance of food and how we're marketed to as parents and just as consumers and things like that. So obviously you moved your whole family here. The rest of your family's back in California. Yep. Have you gotten them this way yet? A little bit? Not really?
One family's left California. We'll see.
I was just in California and it's lovely and there's so many positive, great things about California. So I don't want to bash California. But how do you, as a mom of 2 young girls, maintain in our culture, in our society, and all the things that are coming at us and our kids, a healthy lifestyle for your kids? I know so many moms are like, and you work full time. You don't have a cook and a maid and all that at home. You do it all. But how can we do this? It's doable.
It's doable. It's not easy, I'll tell you that. But when you are so committed to a cause and the health of your children, like nothing will stop me from giving them what I need to. So simply put, number one, we don't have screens in our household. So 8 years ago, we got rid of all TVs in our house.
Yeah,
so
wow.
that takes something out, and you don't realize how much passive time and energy goes into TV or other screens. It doesn't mean we never watch something, but we intentionally sit down to watch a show, a movie, or something. There's nothing passively consuming our attention. And how much time you free up when you do that is remarkable. So
that is so true.
Yeah. I do utilize modern conveniences. I get my groceries delivered. We eat exclusively organic at home. And when you have simple meals that you rotate regularly all the time, it's easy to feed your kids what they want. The other thing is, don't expose them to the stuff that you have to take away later.
Yeah, so good.
When I went to a birthday party and my kids were 3, 4, 5, and there's a Safeway cake, I don't condemn families that raise their kids differently, but when you know better, you do better. And my kids don't eat dyes. They don't eat conventional sugar. They don't eat a lot of these things. We just don't allow it in our house. And so when we went to birthday parties, I brought their own dessert. I still to this day bring my own desserts for my kids, and they even ask hey Mom, can we go to the store and pick something up, so just in case it's something I can't have, because they know their body doesn't feel good, and we're super open and transparent with our kids. And when they have a lot of sugar and they get amped up and then their emotions get really high, we even openly express our body doesn't feel that good when we do this, and I just want you to be attentive to that. And they're like, yeah. So sometimes they don't feel good, and they're like, I think I had too much sugar today. And I'm like, could be. But we make our meals at home. We bring our own desserts when we go out to places. We eat before we go sometimes, because my intention when we go out to a friend's house or something like that is to never say no to food that people cook with love and care, because the intention behind it is positive. But if somebody shows up with a Safeway cake, I feel totally empowered to be able to say no thank you, and my kids say no thank you, and give them something different.
Right.
In terms of school, this was the hardest part, when you have somebody that's in 2nd grade and people bring class cupcakes. So at this point, we've now empowered our child to say, I make the choice to eat this at school, knowing that there's something, and they will choose the white frosting over the blue if there's a vanilla over something else. Or they can come home and say, Mom, today they offered cupcakes for Johnny's birthday, and I said no thank you because all of them were pink. And at that point, I drive her to Natural Grocers, and she can pick out any sweet treat that she wants, big, small, whatever it is. And it's something where we can bond together, and she knows that she can get something. And it could have been, they passed out 3 M&Ms at school, and I take her and I get a giant thing. But she feels empowered to make the choice, and she knows the difference, and she knows some of the tips and tricks to pick the white frosting over the pink, and she feels like she's meeting me halfway. But
it's so crazy about that too, is I remember with my youngest daughter when the rule came out that you could not bring any more home-baked goods to school. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. No, go bring the chemical-laden and processed grocery store cakes. Those are all really great tips, and I love, one of my favorite things about, and obviously a lot of people don't know we work together, and you've just become such an integral part of the growth of our clinics and the staff and everything. But one of the things I love about you, and it's such a great reminder, is just to honor each other. I think we get so offended, and then just to meet people where they're at and figure out how how you just displayed that you honor your own child by giving them information and then letting them choose. And then how you feel after you make that choice. So now, because I think as parents, in the name of trying to protect our kids, we it's like, no, you can't have that. Well, that just makes them want that thing more, right? So I really love all that, and I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that we can have a conversation about. But this was a tough one. This was a controversial one, probably, but I think that we had the dialogue with honor and respect for everybody's opinion. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.